Hola, welcome to Profe Brown Spanish. Today we're going to look at the preterite and imperfect tenses, which are both past tenses. And the way we're going to look at it today is through actions. And we're going to look at how to use each of these past tenses depending on certain rules and other things that we would need to follow. So, first of all, the preterite tense is the past tense that is the name for the past tense that you would have recognized before, that you would have used for describing things that you did in the past. And the imperfect tense is the one that we will look at now, and we'll make the comparisons between each one and when to use each one. So, like I said, we're going to relate this to actions, things that you did in the past, talking about ourselves as in using the I form of both these tenses with reference to actions. So, we've got past tenses. Like I said, both of these are past tenses, referring to things that have been done or things that you have done. So the first one is the preterite tense. Like I said, this one is the one that you'll probably be most familiar with regards to describing things or describing things that you have done in the past tense. It is the one where the rule for talking about I in the past tense, where AR verbs change to E with an accent, and ER and IR verbs change to I with an accent. So like I said, you're probably familiar with that rule. That is the rule for changing verbs, talking about I in the past tense in terms of a one-off action. And that is one of the keys to the preterite tense, okay? It would need to be in most cases, one-off action or event. But like I said, we're looking at with regards to actions today, things that we've done with a specific time frame or time period. And we'll come on to examples of that later on. The other tense that we're going to look at, the other tense that we're going to make a comparison with today with regards to the preterite tense is the imperfect tense. So the rule for this one, the imperfect tense, and I'll come on to what the imperfect actually means in a minute, but the rule for this tense, for AR verbs, you take the AR off and you add aber. Again, this is talking about I in this tense, in the past tense. So I did this, I used to do this, that kind of thing. So AR verbs change to aber, ER and IR verbs change to ER. Note the accent on the I there. So we've got aber and ER for this tense here. And compared to the preterite tense, the rules with regards to using this tense and regarding to using this rule in the past tense to describe what you did in the past, whereas when the preterite tense it is a one-off action, you would use the imperfect tense and you would use this rule to describe repeated or habitual actions. So rather than one-off, it would have been done several times. And the other sort of rule that you need to follow with regards to this one, instead of it a specific time period, it's a more general time period. So encompassing probably a larger period of time, and it is not so specific. If you don't know the specific time, then you would use this tense. So essentially, going back to that and going back to the repeated and the one-off distinction, preterite tense, as I said, is the rule that you probably recognise from before with regards to using the past tense. AR verbs change to E with an accent, ER and IR verbs change to I with an accent. That is the rule for talking about something that was done one-off or as a one-off action in most cases, whereas the imperfect tense is talking about repeated or habitually repeated actions, talking about maybe used to do this or have done several times in the past. So with regards to the time phrases, let's have a look, or the time periods and the time phrases that we could use to relate to these periods. Let's have a look at some examples. So like I said, the preterite tense is used for specific time phrases, specific period. So examples of time phrases that we could use with this tense would be phrases like ayer, meaning yesterday. We could have la semana pasada, meaning last week. We could have something like hace 2 meses, meaning 2 months ago. Remember, hace followed by a number or a time phrase refers to ago. And all of these are examples of specific time periods. Okay, yesterday, last week, 2 months ago. These are time periods that let you know exactly when something happened. So these time periods would be followed by the preterite tense, would be used with the preterite tense following this rule. On the other side, examples of more general time periods that we would use with the imperfect tense. We would have phrases such as cuando era más joven, when I was younger, or literally more young, más joven, more young, when I was younger. Other ones such as cuando tenía 10 años, which literally translates as when I had 10 years, or as we would say in English, when I was 10 years old. It's important to remember that when we're talking about age, we would use the imperfect. And finally, another example that we could use for this tense, en el pasado, meaning in the past. And like I said, these are all examples of general time periods, and as a result, they're not specific. It doesn't say exactly when something happened or when things were carried out. It is more general, and as a result, we would need to use the imperfect tense with this. So phrases like when I was younger, that could mean anything from the age of 1 to the age of 12. That's not a specific time, it's quite a general time. Like I said, when we're talking about age in the past, we need to use the imperfect tense. So that's why we have cuando tenía 10 años in this case, or any age. We can change that number. Any age we would need to use the imperfect tense. And again, en el pasado, it doesn't say exactly when in the past, it just says in the past. So it's quite a general time. So again, we would need to use the imperfect tense for that. So let's have a look at some examples of how these would be used in context. So there are 6 verbs that I will use in these examples today. We will have ayudar, meaning help or to help. We'll have a look at comer, meaning eat or to eat. We'll have a look at salir, meaning go out or to go out. There'll be our examples for AR, ER and IR verbs, and then the other 3 verbs that we're going to look at will be ir, meaning to go, ser, meaning to be, and ver, meaning to watch or to see. So we've got our 3 examples, or examples for sort of regular verbs, AR, ER and IR verbs, and then the other 3 I'll come on to in a minute. So if we leave those ones there. So we'll use ayudar for the first example, ayudar meaning to help. So let's have a look at ayudar in both of these contexts. So an example sentence we might have for these using ayudar, for example, hace 2 meses ayudé a mi vecino. So this would mean 2 months ago I helped my neighbour. So as we said before, and if we go back to the original sheet that we have here, hace 2 meses would be an example of a specific time phrase or a specific time period. So when we have a specific time period, we know exactly when something happened, we use the preterite tense. So the verb that we're using is ayudar, and as you can see, ayudar is an AR verb. So in the preterite tense, AR verbs change to E with an accent. So because we've got a specific time phrase, hace 2 meses, 2 months ago, we use ayudé, I helped, as in this case, I helped my neighbour. So continuing with the verb ayudar, let's have a look at it in the imperfect tense. So that's an example of the preterite tense, specific time, so therefore we use ayudé. So the imperfect tense, we'll use a general time phrase with this one. For example, something like en el pasado. As I said before, en el pasado is a general time period. It is not specific. En el pasado, in the past, could encompass any sort of time period in the past, so it is not specific. So in that case, because it is not a specific time period, it is more general, we need to use the imperfect tense. And if we go back to this sheet here, as you can see, ayudar, which is an AR verb, AR verbs in the imperfect tense change to aber. So to say I helped, or also I used to help, it can either one, it would become ayudaba a mi vecino. So en el pasado ayudaba a mi vecino. In the past, I helped my neighbor. So as you can see, the English translations of these words here, ayudé and ayudaba, are both the same. They both could be translated as I helped. This one could also be translated as I used to help, but it would still make sense in English this way. The thing that we need to be aware of is the time phrase. And this is an example of when we need to think in Spanish and think about what time phrases we're using to help us understand which form of the verb to use. So in these cases, ayudé and ayudaba both mean I helped. But the thing that we use to distinguish between whether to use ayudé or ayudaba, referring to I helped, is the time phrase. Again, hace 2 meses, 2 months ago, is a specific time phrase. We know exactly when it happened, so we use the preterite ayudé. In this case, en el pasado is a more general time phrase, so we use ayudaba, even though both of them could translate as I helped. The key thing with these tenses is the time phrase. It will tell you which form of the verb you need to use. So let's have a look at another example with comer. So ayudar is an AR verb, comer is an ER verb. So we have a different rule for this. So let's go with ayer comí verduras, which will translate as yesterday I ate vegetables. So that'd be an example of the preterite tense. Let's compare that with the imperfect tense. Cuando era más joven, comía verduras, which would translate as when I was younger, I ate vegetables. Again, this is an example of the English translation using the exact same verb, I ate, but the Spanish way of translating, or the Spanish way of saying it, is different, or the Spanish way of using the verb comer is different depending on the time phrase. So in this case, ayer is yesterday, which is a specific time. You know exactly when it happened yesterday. So we use comí, the preterite form, I ate vegetables. Cuando era más joven is a more general time phrase. It's not specific. It can, like I said, could be anything between the ages of 2 and 12 for all we know. But cuando era más joven is a more general time phrase. Therefore, we use the imperfect form of the verb. And like I said, if we go back to this, if it is a specific time phrase, we use the preterite. If it's a general time phrase or general time period, we use the imperfect. Hence why we have comí and comía. Essentially, like I said, both of them can mean I ate, but which one we use depends on the time phrase. I'll say it again, the time phrase is so important to determine which form of the verb we're going to use. Let's do one more example with the other verb that we had from earlier, salir, which is an example of an IR verb. So, la semana pasada salí con mis primos, which would be last week I went out with my cousins. So we've got la semana pasada is a specific time phrase. We know when it happened, therefore we use the preterite hence salí, where IR verbs change to I with an accent. If we use a more general time phrase, such as talking about age, remember, we're talking about age, we use the imperfect tense. So for example, cuando tenía 10 años, salía con mis primos, which would translate as when I was 10 years old, or literally when I had 10 years. When I was 10 years old, I went out with my cousins. And like I said before, when we're talking about age in the past, we need to use the imperfect tense, okay? So whereas in this case, la semana pasada, specific time, last week, we would use salí, which is the preterite tense. When we're talking about age, we need to use the imperfect, so salía. Again, even though the English translation is exactly the same, I went out, we need to look at the time phrase to work out which form of the verb we need to use in Spanish, whether it be salí, salía, comí, comía, ayudé, ayudaba, all that kind of stuff. So just going back to this, like I said, the verb can be exactly the same, and we need to change it, the Spanish form of the verb, depending on which time phrase we use. So just so you're aware, this can also be, for example, this one, in the past, I used to help my neighbor. Ayudaba can translate as I used to help. Comía can translate as I used to eat. Salía can translate as I used to go out. But like I said, even if it does translate as the same phrase in English, we need to be aware of which form of the verb to use, depending on, as always, for these two tenses, the time phrase. So, the last three verbs that we're going to look at from this original list, like I said, we had one example of an AR verb, one example of an ER verb, and one example of an IR verb. These last three here, I've highlighted what we're going to look at now, because these are important for the imperfect tense especially. So, we've got ir, which means to go, ser, which means to be or be, and ver, which means to watch or to see. These are important to the imperfect tense because these three verbs are the only three verbs that are irregular in the imperfect tense. Every other verb is regular. Every other verb follows the rule laid out here. But these three verbs are the only three verbs that are irregular. So we only really have three verbs we need to learn with regards to irregular rules. So, ir means to go. To change that to I used to go or I went in the imperfect tense, it would become iba. Ser, we have actually already seen today when we used it earlier, saying cuando era más joven, when I was younger. So ser becomes era, as in I was or I used to be. And ver, the last irregular in this tense, becomes veía. And again, so iba can mean I went or I used to go in the imperfect tense. Era, I was or used to be. And veía, I watched or used to watch. Like I said, these are the only three irregulars in this tense. So if you can remember the rule for this tense, for the imperfect tense, if you can remember this rule, there are only three irregulars to remember. So actually every other verb, apart from these three, every other verb follows that rule in this tense. So let's just put them into example sentences so we can see. But essentially they work the same way as before. You use them with a general time period, not a specific one, use them with the general time period, and they follow the same way. So for example, cuando era más joven, iba al polideportivo, which we translate as when I was younger, I went or I used to go to the sports centre. So like I said, as long as you can remember those three irregulars, every other verb, every other infinitive verb follows the rule with regards to changing it in the imperfect tense. Because we've got era here, we've got iba there. We'll do one more example. Cuando tenía 9 años, no veía películas de terror. When I was 9 years old, or literally when I had 9 years, when I was 9 years old, I didn't watch horror films. So that's just an example of, like with every other verb form or verb conjugation, we make sure if we're making a negative, we just put no in front of the verb. So cuando tenía 9 años no veía películas de terror could change to cuando tenía 9 años veía películas de terror, meaning I did watch, or I did used to watch horror films. So like I said, if you go back to the verb beginning, the main thing about these two tenses is the time phrase. If it is a specific time period or specific time phrase and it happened once, we would need to use the preterite tense, the one that we've studied before. If it is a general time period, phrases such as when I was younger, when I was 10 years old, in the past, all examples of general time periods, and it is repeated or it's habitual, we need to use the imperfect tense, which is where AR verbs change to aber, ER and IR verbs change to ER. Even if the translation in English is exactly the same, I helped in this case, the form of the verb that we use in Spanish is different depending on the time period. So make sure to bear that in mind. Adios.